It's finally time to finish assembling the engine. For those of you that's been following along, you probably remember the SD card failure from November last year. Well, hopefully this is the last video it affects. Last year I built this cylinder head. I did it all on video, and unfortunately it's gone. Luckily, I at least had some screenshots and some pictures I took along the way, and I was messaging them to friends, and so I have those. I did not lose those. So what I will do here after I show you the cylinder head, I'll show you some pictures of what I do have anyway, of the steps I went over while I did this. So starting out with this head, I cleaned it, bead blasted it, found that the seats were rough but not in horrible shape, but they did need to be cut. I did not bother installing hardened valve seats or anything. We'll see how this goes. We always ran unleaded in it, and it was not a big deal and didn't really show much wear from that. But the ones that show a lot of wear were mainly pitted from rust, and it was mostly on the valves that were open while the tractor was sitting in storage for 20-something years. So anyway, I cut the valve seats, installed new guides, new valves, and even new springs. So the only thing I reused on the valve train is the retainers themselves and the little seats at the bottom that hold the spring center. I did have to take apart and rebuild the rotators. They were all gummed up, the exhaust valve rotators, and I probably would have just eliminated them if I had enough good retainers, but I did not have enough good intake retainers to use. One of them was pretty damaged on the parts tractor. But anyway, this is cylinder head as it sits, ready to go. Other than the cylinder head, got some of our valve train components here. Got the towers I cleaned up. Bead blasted these that hold the rocker shaft. The rocker arms themselves. And I also resurfaced the set part that rubs the valve. Got the springs cleaned up. Studs are all cleaned up, including that one with the groove that was plugged up. Got some rust starting. They've been sitting here for quite a while, waiting for me. Also, we got the rocker shaft. Oh, this got a little bit of rust on it too. I'll polish that up again before I start, but what I did with this is once I cleaned it, put it on the lathe and polished it with some really fine emery cloth. But there's a little bit of rust spot right there I need to clean up. All this stuff's been sitting wrapped up waiting for me. But this one's not too bad. It's got some scoring from the rockers, but not really too bad. It doesn't have grooves like the other one did. So this one should be good. So what I want to do next, before I go any further, before we put this on the engine, I want to go ahead and install my studs and get the rocker shaft and arms all laid out and in place. Because it's just easier to do that sitting here at the bench than it is while it's on the engine. Now I won't bolt it down or anything, but I'll get the rocker arms installed on the shaft and get it all lined up where it's supposed to be, and then slide it off, set it to the side. So once I get it installed, I'll just set it in place and bolt it down, and then adjust the valve clearance. But right now I will show you the pictures of how I got this far. Here's what it looked like after removing the valves. This one valve on top is a valve seat where the valve was open for 25 years. Here it is after partial cleaning. Got a glass bead blasted on the left side, just degreased on the right side. Here's completely clean and ready to assemble. Here's that same valve seat after bead blasting. You can see it's pretty pitted by rust. There is no valve seat insert here. This is after using a cheap valve seat cutter by hand off Amazon, about 30 bucks. It did not turn out very well. It chattered a lot. I could not get a smooth cut with it, so I ended up having to improvise, and I clamped it into my mill. So here I have it set up in the mill. I shimmed it up to where it was at the right angle, and I was able to use that same cutter but achieve a lot better cut. Here's what it looks like on the right hand done by hand, on the left hand done with the mill. I have not undercut it yet in this picture. Here it is, ready to assemble. Okay, this is the tip of the rocker arms that contact the valves. You can see the worn one on the left, the one I reconditioned on the right. The way I reconditioned it is I used a belt sander. I did have it clamped down on a table where it was at 90 degrees, and I verified it was square with a machinist square. I did use valve seals, the umbrella style valve seals, loose fitting just over the valves, just to stop oil from dripping down. The previous valve job had these and it seemed to work pretty good, so I went with it. These universal type valve seals, they don't really seal tightly, they just stop oil from dripping down the valve stem into the gap. Okay, now we'll carry on with the engine assembly. First stud I'm going to install is the one for the oil supply to the rocker assembly. So you have oil goes into here, comes out that hole through a groove. So this is the only one with a groove, and you have to make sure it's here. I'm just going to lock a couple of the nuts together here. Use it to tighten it down. Alright, in the previous video I proved it doesn't matter which direction this groove faces, but it actually worked out. It got tight, lined up with this hole, so we're good there. I'll speed up the rest of these. Something I just realized I forgot to do is chase all the threads for the manifold to get the paint out and the thermostat housing, but I'll be sure to do that before I put it on the engine. Okay, so I'm going to assemble this and get it all lined up and make sure I get these in the right order. And then I'll worry about taking them apart and putting some assembly lube on them. What's weird, I'm not sure why I didn't really investigate. They're also marked. Turn it around here. Also marked intake and exhaust. Outers are exhaust, then intake again, and the two centers are exhaust. So I'm going to line it up like that and see what happens. Something else I'm going to do here. On the shaft, where the wear marks are, the wear marks are only on one side. It's not much, but it's a really small groove. The wear marks are on this side, which tells me this part was down before, and the rocker arms pushing up on it were wearing it. So I'm going to actually install this upside down. It's no different. And put the fresh metal on the bottom. Something else I want to do also is set a bolt in place here, just to keep it from sliding off. And there is no orientation to which way this goes, so I'll start with it like this. First one's going to be exhaust. Then we're going to have a spring. Then we're going to have intake. Then we're going to have another one of these towers. And I'll have a bolt holding that. So then we are going to have an exhaust. Then we're going to have a spring. Then an intake. Then another tower. Oop, actually that is wrong. That's exhaust and exhaust, and I just put exhaust and intake. So now we got intake. I just want to make sure all this lines up, and if it does, I'll put it together with a little assembly lube. So intake and intake. Another tower. And it should put us there. Okay, looking down them. They're all the same height. They are offset a little bit though. This one's offset from here a little bit. So it looks like they're all offset a little bit based on this being a tad too wide. This one needs to go over this way more, this one needs to go over this way more. This one's actually not bad. This one needs to go in more, and this one needs to go in more. So what could cause that? Looks like the only fix is to machine this a little bit. Well, I could tell you what, I got the wrong one on there. Should be exhaust. Wonder if that would help. It's a little offset. Nope, doesn't change a thing. The exhaust side on the end is even pushed out too far. Makes me wonder if there's different size standoffs, different widths. As you can see, that one's really offset. That one's only a little bit. That one and that one's pretty good offset. This one's really bad. Alright, let's do some investigating here. So the fix might be, if I don't come up with another answer, is to clamp this in the middle and face it a little bit. Take some measurements and see how much I need to take off to get that offset to where it needs to be. Okay, quick update here. I reviewed my teardown video and they were offset like that on this engine also. I do remember them being offset on the parts tractor when I took it apart. But it also had some bent push rods and some other stuff going on, so I assumed it was that, but apparently it was offset like that on this too. Well, it's offset a lot and I don't like it being offset that much, so I am going to fix that. Let's put this thing back together real quick, and I want to take some measurements and see if I can figure out the best way to approach this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down so they're level and they sit exactly where they're going to be. I'm going to take some measurements. Figure out how much I need to remove. Well, at least I have a few extra rocker arms if I wipe one out. But looking at it, some of them got to come over a lot. It's probably going to be a combination of machining this post and the rocker arm. Alright, I'm not going to machine them on video, but I will show it all to you once I get it measured up and done. See you then. So, this morning I machined these supports. All of them needed about 800 thousandths off one side of each one, and anywhere from 10 to 30 thousandths off my right side here. So it's like the whole thing was offset a little bit, it seems. But did that. Everything is centered. Some of them might be a tad off of center, but the pad on the rocker arm is fully covering the stem, which is good enough in this case. I guess the way it was is good enough. It lasted 70 years, but we'll see here. So anyway, it's bolted up. It's not going to stay this way. We'll take it off when we put it on the head. What's left on these rocker arms on the end, you have a cotter pin that holds it in place. Normally there's a washer that sits on the end. Then you drive the pin in place. But it gives us a ton of slack here. I want it to sit tighter. So, what I'm going to do here, I found another washer, which the inside diameter is exactly the same. The outside diameter is a little bigger, but that doesn't matter. There's plenty of room under the valve cover. But the important part is it's thicker. And once we put that one in, we're still free, but we don't have the side to side. On this one, one washer works great. I only took about 10 thousandths off of this one, and there's still plenty of room there. So we'll put a thicker washer on this side, use a factory washer on that side, and that should be it. One thing here, I'm just going to do this off camera before I assemble it later. On the ends of these holes, there were cork plugs. So underneath this pin, there was a cork plug driven in there. And what that is, when oil feeds into this oil feed, comes up the stud, and it fills that rocker shaft. It won't pour out the sides. It'll fill the rocker shaft and lubricate all of the rocker arms. So I got some corks for that. I could not find the smaller correct size corks, at least locally, but I found some larger ones and I just put them on the belt sander and cut them down to size. So I'll tap those in, and once they're tapped in, once these pins lock in place, they'll hold it. That's it for the cylinder head. Alright, there's our rocker assembly. I just need to put the adjuster screws in it, like this one, but I'll do that later, once I put it on the engine. Alright, time to install the cylinder head. I cleaned off our gasket surface, put brake cleaner on a rag and wiped it over and over and over until the rag was clean. So should be good to go here. There are a couple little pitted areas, but not too bad and nothing close to the edge of anything. If this block was decked, it'd probably be better off, but it's really not in bad shape. Now, this head gasket I have is a lead head gasket. If it was a fiber head gasket, since I'm not machining this head or the block, I would probably spray copper coat on it. But lead head gaskets, you shouldn't do that. So I'm going to install it as is. And see how it goes. Hopefully we get no water jacket leaks. That's the only thing I'm worried about, because I'm sure it's going to seal where the combustion chambers are. But all of the water passages are in good shape around them, so it shouldn't be a big deal there. And when we measured our protrusion height of these sleeves, they were all in spec, so this gasket should compress properly. So I think we will bolt it down and go for it. I cleaned these bolts, but it was before I had a bead blaster to clean them up nice and shiny. It should still work out okay. Now I'm not going to torque them with this. I'm just running them till they touch. Less ratchet work I got to do. Alright, now torque wrench time. Forgot to turn the camera back on when I got the torque wrench out. So I was torquing these down in sequence. Your final is 60 foot-pounds. I started off at 20, then did 40. Now I'm going to go for 60. Alright. I'm following the sequence in the book. Alright, torque sequence on this one's pretty important. Start off in the middle. Usually start off in the middle, work your way out in an X pattern. But the book in this one, we start off in the middle and do like a circular pattern, working your way out. Very important to do this in steps. 10 to 20 foot-pounds each to bring it down. Something I wish was on camera, but when I didn't turn it on, when I was tightening down, when I got to about 30 foot-pounds on one side, you heard a pop, and what that was your sleeves seating completely. So you want to make sure you push it down evenly and slowly to seat the sleeves and not pinch the gasket. I'm going to go ahead and set the push rods in place. Now there's already grease in the little notch on the tappet. I got to make sure I don't miss the tappet. So these are the adjusters, all cleaned up and smooth. Got to put the washer on that. So I'm looking underneath the pads to make sure I'm putting them down even, because if I tighten down one side too much, I can crack the rocker shaft. Make sure those are lower. Okay, now I'm gonna look up torque spec. Alright, there is no spec. And all three of the shop manuals I have. So now we're going to set valve lash. The spec on this valve lash for all intake and exhaust is 10 thousandths. And that was a common spec back in the day. There's a reason your 10 thousandths feeler gauge is a different color on some of these older kits. Alright, number one's on the exhaust stroke. And that's what we're looking at here. Intake stroke. Now we're on compression, so we can set number one. Just get a nice sliding fit. Alright, see if I can tighten the jam nut and keep it that way. Okay, got a little slack there. 10 thousandths. No slack with the feeler gauge in it. We're good. So the firing order on this one is 1, 2, 4, 3. Most four cylinders are 1, 3, 4, 2. But so we're going for this one next. It's already on the intake stroke. Intake valves down. Alright, now we're in compression. It's hard to describe how this is supposed to feel on the camera, but it's too tight it doesn't slide, too loose it slides easily, so we want to get it to where it just starts to slide freely. So we still have slack. Not enough in that one. I moved it. This one's good. That one apparently I tightened up a little as I was tightening the jam nut. This is something I would need to readjust after it runs for a bit. Also retorque the head gasket after you get a couple heat cycles in it. Next will be cylinder 3. Intake valves open, so we're on the intake stroke. Turn it till that one closes and give it a little more, and there we go. Cylinder head and valves are done. Alright. Next up, we're going to install the governor. I did not replace this bushing here. It seems to be in pretty good shape, and there was not excessive clearance with the gear sitting in it, so we're going to go with that one. First thing we need to do is set our timing mark. What we're looking for here. Camshaft has two timing marks, a straight line and an O. Straight line is supposed to go to the crank. There should be an O that will line up with the Magneto. I think it should be coming up here shortly. If my luck is covered with that grease. Let's see. Can't see there very good, so I'm going to move the camera, find it, and then bring the camera back, because the camera's right in the way of me seeing this. I was expecting it to be on a tooth, but it's not. Really hard to see, but it's below this gap. I'm not sure if the camera's even picking it up. At least now we know it's on the opposite side, but this line is the one that's supposed to go to the crank. Yeah, I don't think that helps you see it at all. So that means one turn of the crankshaft should put me there. No wonder I didn't see it. It was gobbed with a mess. Past it. And come back to it. Okay. There it is. Alright, that shows up in the camera pretty good. That O right there is our timing mark for the cam gear. There's the governor. It's all cleaned up, ready to go. It's an important orientation for this bearing. This bearing here has one side that spins free, and the other side is actually part of the center. The part that spins free faces out. And the reason being, on these weights, you have the solid part touching the weights. The solid part also rides on this stem. So the solid part spins with the stem. And this is the only section that moves separately. The timing marks on this one's kind of hard to see. There's an O there. And that O with a tooth goes in it, but it's pretty dinged up, so it's not the easiest to see. But I'm going to get this greased up and it's going to slide in. And it would match just like that. Let's see if we can move it to where you can see the marks here. And with this you can see the O on that gear matches the cam. Alright, have our bearing greased up, the back greased up, and even put some in the bushing there. Oh, I'm off a tooth. There we go. Now we're in. O and O. Okay, next up's the housing. And our governor housing here. That's the best one I had. It was in pretty good shape. Bushing inside's in great shape. Fork's not worn bad. So, the housing we're going to use is going to go right here. Just got to put a little grease in here and just get some RTV on it. long as the engine still turns, we're good, right? Funny I said that. Something weird's going on. It's not liking to turn. You know what I bet? I bet this is one place where it doesn't like RTV. Spacing of that bushing. Probably kind of important. Now it turns easy. I'm going to pull that back off of there and regroup and see what it needs. Alright, so I'm going to place this gasket in here and see if this is enough. Hopefully it is, because I'm not going to put a gasket behind the timing cover at this point. If it's not, I'll see what I could do to get another one of these gaskets and maybe put two behind it. I'm not going to bother doing that part on camera, but essentially I'm just going to remove this, clean it off, put the gasket in place, and install it and see how it goes. Okay, gasket installed and we are good to go. And I could tell it's not binding at all because moving this, I can still move this gear in and out a little bit. So we're good to go there. Alright, what's next? Water pump and thermostat housing, but I need bolts for that. I have not got the stainless hardware for that yet. Let's see here. Could pop on the intake and exhaust manifold. Oil filter housing can go on. And I might wait till I throw the oil pump on for that because they connect together and it might be easier to do the oil filter housing after the oil pump. Magneto I'll save for last. I still need to get a gasket for that. I'll have it all in this video though, but I think we should go ahead and put the intake manifold on. Digging up my studs, apparently I'm missing one. But I want to see it in place, so we'll set it in place with all but one stud. Thought these were a set of 4 when I got the longer ones, but they come in a set of 3, so it isn't the fact I'm missing it, I just did not order it. So, see how that's sitting down low in the ports? I go to tighten it, I need to remember to raise it up and center it. Man, that's starting to look like an engine. These studs aren't long enough for these nuts, but I only have a couple of these shorter ones. I have 2, so I'll use these for now. I'll put it down with the right hardware later. I'm not even going to tighten it. So on this one I'll need a shorter nut. Then bolt the generator bracket to it. Might have ended up putting a longer stud there, I'm not sure. Alright, so yesterday we left off with installing the governor. I did install the throttle linkage to the carburetor last night. I did it off camera, but it's pretty simple. I'll give you a quick walk around. First off, we installed our throttle bracket here. It goes up to the control by the steering wheel. Your governor spring. This direction is bringing the throttle up. Pulling it back brings it back to idle. And for it to reliably come back to idle, your spring must have that little metal plug in it. What that plug does is it makes a solid connection from here to here when you pull your throttle back. There's also the oil feed that'll end up coming from the cylinder head to here to drip oil onto the governor. Got a couple nylon washers here. Got a throttle set up back there. There is one part I still need to install. You see this little hole right here? There's a spring that goes in that to one of the studs on the exhaust manifold, and that helps eliminate surge. On this particular tractor, I don't ever remember that spring being there, and we never really had a surging problem, but I do have a spring to put on, and we'll do that later. One thing I did this morning also, before I fired up the camera, I drilled and tapped the crank shaft on the front. I actually did not tap it very deep because I broke my tap off, unfortunately, so it might be enough. But the reason I did that is to make installing the crank pulley easier. Usually you just hammer that thing on because it's press fit. But I'm going to try to put a stud here, set the pulley on, and put a nut and washer on and draw it down. So that's the plan there. But for right now, we are going to install the water pump and thermostat housing. So here's the water pump we'll install. This particular pump I bought off of Reliable Aftermarket Parts on Amazon. I'll show you a picture of it here. I'll put a picture up, but I went to clean it. It looked nice and cast, but I went to clean it, to paint it, and cleaning it ripped all the paint off of rusted cast iron, so it was painted over rust. So I'm not very happy with that. The gasket itself that was in between this plate was a fiber gasket that was coated with grease, but it was also deteriorating the gasket, so I got rid of that and put RTV in here and bolted this down a while ago before I painted it. But we're going to go ahead and install it. This bottom center bolt hole actually goes all the way through to the water jacket. So I'm going to need to put some thread sealant on this bolt so it'll seal. Otherwise, water will seep between the bolt and that hole and come up around the head and possibly leak. So I'll get this ready to install real quick and we'll throw it on. I'm going to use RTV for this also instead of a paper gasket. Oops. I'm making sure I get it lined up perfectly before I set it down, because with that RTV on there I don't want to slide it around. So I'll get the bolts just started and then slide it in. Lower bolt that goes all the way through. Put thread sealant on it. Water pump is installed. Now it's time for the thermostat housing. So I put its thermostat housing together on another video. Something important here. On the top, the original bolts had a copper gasket. I'm replacing them with stainless bolts and a new copper gasket. These copper sealing rings here, they're the ones I have are actually off of banjo fittings for brake calipers, but most any auto parts store would have these. Don't want to tighten it with this, just want to run it down. I'll tighten it by hand. Alright, let's do a quick walk around of what we did so far. Water pump installed. Thermostat housing installed. One more touch just for fun. I won't tighten this down because I don't want it in here to get broken, but the gauge will mount like that. So next step, I believe I will try to install a crank pulley. I want to show you something here. I put a straight edge against the keyway and put a couple scribe marks on each side. So when I start to press the pulley on, I could line the groove in the pulley with those two marks, because it would really suck to be a little bit off and then bump into the key. So this will help me line it up from the beginning. So I polished the shaft up a little bit before I did the scribe marks. I also cleaned up and polished the inside of this pulley. Hopefully I can get this stud in here enough. Feels tight, but no telling what's going to happen when we start pulling on it. On the top, it looks like my keyway's lined up. Let me get a little light and look on the inside. I think so. Get started. Still looks good with the keyway. Maybe it taps on easy enough and this isn't necessary, but figured it couldn't hurt. Put tape on that washer so it would not mar up that paint too bad. Even though the first time I hand crank this, it's going to destroy it. But make me feel better right now anyway. Okay, and we're sliding over the key. That's good. So this should actually seat and stop once it gets all the way down. There's a little shoulder inside of the pulley. Yep, we're there. Well, I feel like that did make it a little easier. So next step is there is a set screw that goes on top of that pulley. So we'll do that next. It's time to install this bolt to lock the pulley in place. The original bolt that went in there was pretty tore up, so I made a new one. I got one of these extra exhaust studs and cut the end off. So I'm going to thread this down and then put a jam nut on top of it. Alright, I don't want to scratch up my paint with a ratchet here, so we'll just set that tape right there just in case the ratchet bumps it. That seems pretty tight. And we'll thread a nut over here. Okay, I needed a thinner socket to get in here. Should be good. So there we are. Installed, ready to go. Next thing I need to do, I want to get this engine off the stand and safely on the ground. And to do that, I'm going to need to build something to hold it, because I want to install the oil pump on the rear, go ahead and mount the flywheel, that sort of thing. But at this point, it needs to be off the stand. So next step, I'm going to go ahead and install my front bracket here and radiator core support. Probably use that partially to hold the engine up. Need to build a couple things for the back. I have an engine stand on wheels, but it's a little small for this. I don't trust it. This is going to be too top heavy, so we won't use that this round. So I already took off the temporary spacers I had here. And you have these two metal spacers. Go down first. We have this plate, which this plate does is the wishbone front end actually mounts to here, and this supports the entire weight of the tractor, on the front half anyway. And then next is going to be the radiator support, which we had to bend this back into shape, so it might not quite line up right at first. Let's see if I look out. Oh wow. Guess that worked pretty good. The nuts I'm going to use here are original. I'm not going to put stainless steel hardware on anything that's structural, because it's not as strong. The only exception to that would probably be the big bolts that hold the steering gear down. I might do those stainless because they're visible, and I don't know how much torque there is right there on a parade tractor anyway. At least it's not holding the weight of the tractor up. And I'll paint all these nuts later. I'm not going to torque these down with this, but I'll run them down anyway to save some time. So all these bolts like this, once I get the tractor on the ground and the large components together, I'll go over again, because on the stand I'm not going to be able to torque this enough without rolling the engine over. But I get it close enough for this. Quick walk around here. There was a lot of pitting on this part. There's some spots it's pretty thin, but it's full thickness on this upper half. What it is debris and stuff get inside of the fan shroud area and the grill, and they settle here, and then when it gets wet and moisture on it, it just stays wet for a long time and rusts. I think that side's the worst. This other side's not near as bad. There we go. It's getting closer. So I think to stand this up off the ground, I'll get some angle iron or something and bolt here, where it's got a leg on each side on the back that comes down just below the oil pan level. And this looks like it sits below the oil pan level. So I just put a block of wood under there, and it should be fine. So all I gotta do is make two pieces. So I will do that. Once I'm done with that, get it on the ground, then we'll start installing the oil pump and maybe the flywheel. Got the engine taken off the engine stand, and I found this furniture dolly I had here. It says it holds 1,000 pounds. It's from Harbor Freight. We're testing it now. I don't know exactly what this engine weighs, but it's probably not that. Put a couple 2x4s under the radiator support. And on the back side, just drilled 2 pieces of angle iron. And it's just sitting on there. I was going to strap it down, but it seems pretty stable. Most of the weight's at the base of this anyway. And the bottom clears everything, so no scratches. Alright, next step we're going to do here, we're going to install the oil pump on the back and the oil filter housing. Okay, time to install the oil pump. We rebuilt this on a previous video, but it will mount here. There is a pin that goes through the camshaft that engages this. So you'll have to make sure this is oriented right to line it up, but it should go on pretty good like that. I've already looked at it. This hole here is the suction side where it draws it up out of the oil pan. I've had that plugged up since I've cleaned it. And this pump has 2 discharge ports. One's out this tube, and it'll discharge out of these 2 holes, and then overpressure as a relief valve will discharge out the center into the camshaft. I'm not sure if it shows up in the video. Looks like it does. See that little passage where there's a hole that opens and closes? That's going to be my trick for pre-lubing this system. I'm going to take an oil pump, electric oil pump, and pump oil into the center tube of the oil filter, which will pressurize this tube and blow oil into the oiling system. Also, oil is going to come out of this fitting, go into the top end, and pre-lube the rockers and everything. So I'll do that. I might do that while it's here on the ground. We'll see. But I'll definitely do it right before I fire it off the first time. So that should prime the pump and pre-lube everything. I'm not going to use RTV to seal this pump because I don't want to get RTV in any of these passages. If it squirts into the suction side, it could block it or get something lodged in the pump. And if any of it goes into this section, it could get into one of the bearings. So we're going to not do that. I am going to use the paper gasket and then spray it with copper coat. I know this isn't quite on the camera, but I don't want to get this stuff all over the engine. So let that dry for a minute. Now fold. Oops. Almost messed it up. I fold the paper so it'll hover there. Do it again. Okay, does not go that way. Try it like this. It's close. The holes don't line up exactly on these gaskets, but it didn't on the one to assemble it either. So it stays fairly in place. I'll get a couple bolts here. Start with 2. So I'm turning this a little bit at a time to get it to engage that shaft. That did it. There is naughty torque spec on this. Now that I torque these down, just in case I compress this lid a little more, I want to hit these flathead screws one more time. Now they're still pretty tight. Oil pump's in. We're going to install the oil filter housing. This came with a cork gasket. I'm going to use RTV on it also. There's actually no pressure here. When this bolts up, any oil that flows through the filter falls back down into the bottom, comes out of this hole into this hole, and inside of here is a chamber behind these plugs where your tappets are and push rods. So it floods the bottom half of this chamber with oil, which lubricates the tappets, and then the oil overflows out of the front and falls down on the timing gears. So I have this RTV favoring the outside edge a little bit, so it shouldn't plug up the center. Good thing about this is I can look down in here with either a little mirror or my borescope and just make sure that that hole is clear all the way through. So I'll be sure to do that before I call it done. Before I set this down completely though, I need to get the metal oil line started. I'm going to just start these screws, but I'm going to keep this pulled away from the block for right now. I don't want that RTV to make contact yet. I think I'm started here. Yeah. Both of them are good. Go ahead and tighten these down. I did pre-fit this without RTV just to get these fittings all lined up. Alright, thanks cast aluminum. I don't want to tighten it too tight and break it. If you're wondering about the finish on these lines, I just spray painted it. Found some aluminum color, spray paint. Bead blasted the lines and fittings, taped off the fittings, and spray painted it last night. Okay. Should be good. Next up, this T-fitting that goes into the head. So I'll need some thread sealant. Already wire brushed and blew out that hole. So I want sealant on the threads, but we'll need to clean up the front because we don't want this going into the oil supply. On the front half, we'll just make sure none of it is in front of this fitting. All needs to be on the threads. That. Okay, tighten these. Now, this bronze fitting, those brass fittings, I bead blasted, then I clear coated just so they don't corrode and they look nice. I don't want to scrape off the clear coat, so I put some tape on my wrench here to protect it. And I don't want to put it on the edge and bend up the edge. So like that, and I'll get the final torque down like this. And with that clear coat like that, they should stay shiny. If I do happen to chip it or anything, it's nothing to just tape it all off and blast it again. Okay, now we have this tube to do. Run from the oil pump to the head. Fresh off the paint rack. Alright, once I pulled that tape off, I blew air through it to make sure it was blown out. This line is the line that would have totally killed this tractor if we kept driving it. When I took the top end apart, it was dry and worn out. Later on, I found this passageway blocked. And once I dug deeper, I found this line was completely plugged. Could not blow air through it either direction. And what it was, forget which edge, there was a pretty sharp bend right at the fitting. And it was full of fibrous material, which I'm guessing was from the oil filters over the years. But it was so bad I had to actually get a drill and drill out the material and then blow back and forth and clean it out. So that's probably worth a check if you've never taken it apart. It's a quick, easy check. You just loosen the fitting up here on the governor. You take that fitting off and fire the engine up and see if oil's coming out of it. If oil's coming out of it, you got it all the way to the governor at least. Or if you pull the valve cover and it's wet, you can see fresh oil. So I have not test fit this line yet or lined anything up. I did modify it some when I was getting rid of that sharp bend, so yeah, it actually goes pretty good. It's turning, it's just stiff, a little bit of a bind. Actually, this one might be a little crossed here. Didn't know this tractor came with a wrench holder. There we go. So these brass fittings that are on the lines, they haven't been painted yet, or clear coated yet. I'll tape off and clear coat those later. Hopefully before they corrode. Just so it stays looking nice. Oil line going to the filter. Oil line going to the head. Supposed to be a gauge down here on the filter, but I'm not going to install that yet because the one I ordered looks nothing like the picture. It showed up and it was just really, it was large. It was really wide and thick and did not look the same. The one in the picture looked like the original Allis Chalmers, and that's what I was going for. So I'm going to have to still come up with the oil pressure gauge. Alright, next line is going to run from here over to the top of the governor. Alright. Here's the end that goes into the head. Here's the end that goes into the governor. So this line itself was all kinds of wavy. It was bent all over the place. I straightened this section. So this one essentially just drips oil on the governor. And the governor spinning slings it around where it needs to be. I think I'm going to go ahead and mount the oil filter. Looks like it's going to be really close to that spark plug though. Well, it fit before. So I remember as a kid changing these oil filters. We used to always have a wooden dowel in there that would hold that material open. Guess the new ones don't. Move the spark plug just to make it easier. These are just in there keeping the hole clean. I'm going to put some oil on the gasket here. So I actually put that whole O-ring in oil, dipped it so it's oil on both sides all around. I'm just going to set this in place just to keep the dirt and dust out, but I'm not going to tighten it down yet because I'll need to take it off before I run it, because I'm going to pre-lube this system through this tube. So I'll put a hose over here, clamp it on, have a little 12-volt electric oil pump pumping oil into this tube, which is going to backfeed through here and pre-lube the top half. Also, it's going to supply oil down to the pump, pre-lube everything else inside the block, and hopefully prime the system along the way. Trick is, it's only going to pre-lube the block out of this tube flowing backwards if those holes line up that I showed you earlier when we put the oil pump on. So what I might do is watch pressure and slowly turn the crank till I see the pressure drop, and then I know it's feeding in, and I'll leave it there. And if I do this on the ground here, I'll just do it without spinning the engine over. But once I have it together and I'm ready to start it, I'll probably do it and then spin the engine over with the starter, just to help it along. This isn't tightened down yet, so it'll go a little lower, but I could see that spark plug jump into that oil filter sometimes. Okay, there's our oiling system. Quick walk around here. Install the oil pump. The line going to the head. And down into the governor. And the line going to the oil filter. And the only thing we're lacking is pressure gauge at this point. I did decide to install this oil pressure gauge I bought off camera. I'm not super happy with it, but it's probably good enough. It's a lot longer than the original. I don't like that look as much. And the face itself, there's a smaller viewing area. Pretty good bit smaller. But it works, and it'll work for now, and it's easy to replace later if it starts bothering me too much. But on this next step, we're going to install the Magneto. I rebuilt this before I knew I was going to make these videos. This was actually the first item on the tractor I built, and I rebuilt this before I even disassembled the tractor. This particular Magneto is a FMX 4B3. The FMJ is the most common on these. I guess the FMX is on the later models. I did find another one I might rebuild on video. I got a Magneto minus the cap and everything. I still got to source that. But I already got new points and a kit for it and everything. So I might build that one on video later on. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it. It's just a spare. First thing we need to do is set top dead center on cylinder number 1. On the compression stroke, I modified a socket so I could turn this engine over with a ratchet. Make it easy. While I'm doing all this, there's a couple ways to do this. If your valve cover is installed and you can't see the valve train, you'd hold your finger over the plug hole. Don't put it in there, but hold it over until you feel pressure. Okay, feel pressure there. And if I didn't have this noise canceling headset, you'd probably heard that. Now I know it's on the compression stroke. So you could shine a flashlight in there if you have a small flashlight and be able to see the piston come up and set it top dead center. Also, we're not going to see it here because I don't have a flywheel or anything attached. There's a mark on there, a timing mark that says fire on the flywheel, and you line that up through a hole. But I'm going to install it without that, and I'll verify that it fires at the right time once it's all together before I fire it off. I'm not going to look in the spark plug hole. I'm going to look at cylinder number 4 rocker arms to tell if it's exactly at top dead center. Now, the relationship between cylinder number 1 and cylinder 4 is the pistons are both going to be at top dead center at the same time. It's just one is going to be on the exhaust stroke and one is on the compression stroke. I know this one's already on the compression stroke, but I also see that the exhaust valve is open. This push rod is pushing up, opening the exhaust valve. What that tells me is the piston's coming up, pushing out the exhaust. Once this valve closes, the intake valve is going to open. Now, in modern engines, you have what's called valve overlap, where they're both going to be open for a little bit of time at top dead center. This older engine, there is no overlap. The exhaust valve is going to close completely just before the intake valve opens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel this push rod and wait till I can spin it freely, and hopefully not be able, or still be able to spin this one. The way I have my crank rotator set up here, it's harder to turn it backwards. If I turn past it, I could just turn it backwards, but we'll see how close I can get. So I'm just turning this push rod till I feel, there we go. Yep, both are still free. So we are on top dead center, compression stroke number 1. Take a look, that's the orientation of your drive gear. There are no marks on it. Okay, so I removed the cap on this so we can see the rotor. I marked here with a pencil where cylinder number 1 is. So right here, it just fired cylinder number 2. Now it's going for 3. I'm sorry, it was going for 4. Now 3. Now it's going to come up and fire cylinder 1. So what I was doing here is clicking our snap coupler, right? You can go back with this to make it easier. Okay, so we're just going to fire cylinder 1. And then we're going to back up to line those up. And I put some marks here for me. But now this should engage that, and we should be in time. I do need to put a gasket on here real quick. Thought I had a longer bolt for the top, stainless bolt, but I used it for something else. So I'm going to put a short one in for now and replace it later. So the gasket for this is right here. It came in the kit. It's really important you put a gasket on here. You might get a little bit of oil leaking out because there is no seal on this shaft. There's just a bushing there, and oil can get past it. And there's a little drain back hole here where when oil puddles up in here, it drains back into the timing cover. A little tricky getting these all lined up, but there we go. Let me get a nut on the bottom. Use one of these brass nuts for right now. The stainless hardware is same place as that bolt somewhere. Okay, I'm not going to tighten this up tight yet. It's just in place. Also, I see that tab is a little too high. I need to take that off when I replace that bolt and bend it back down some. So this gets us roughly there. We're roughly in the right place. What we need to do at this point, once we put it together, is we'll double check that as soon as you see that fire line on the flywheel line up, you should hear this click. In this case, it'll be on cylinder 1 or 4, depending on where I'm at the time. We're firing cylinder 2 next. You'll notice that it should click as soon as this exhaust valve closes on cylinder 3. Now we're firing cylinder 4. It should click as soon as this exhaust valve closes. So that's really close. Fire line might line up. I might need to tweak this a little bit, but we're in the right place. Okay, so fire number 4. We got 1, 2, 4, 3. Yep, so we're where we should be. Went ahead and installed the cap and wires. I went ahead and installed the cap and wires off camera. This video is going to be pretty long as it is, so the simple stuff I just left off cam. This wire is close to shorting out on that filter. Filter's probably not tight yet, but I don't remember that being as close before. So might have to make something for that to take care of that. Wonder if this filter is any taller than the other. This side of the engine is pretty much done. The plugs are only in by hand because I'm going to spin it over and pre-lube everything anyway before I fire it. But got the oil pump and oiling system in, all the oil lines, plugs, wires, Magneto. This side I still need to mount the generator. I did put the bracket on there last night. And I need to get all the exhaust studs. Still missing one. But this engine's getting close to being done. Here's a quick update. I just decided to try my pre-lube setup I was going to do. I got a power supply running an oil pump. Just drawing fluid out of the dipstick hole. Forcing it into this tube, which is running it back through everything, essentially. You look up here at the rocker shaft, so we move it over, we're getting oil to the top. A lot of these oil passages are plugged up with assembly lube, but you can see it there. And once these are all moving, it'll be fine. See something coming out of the top here. So we're working pretty good. I did notice my cork at the end here is not holding, so I need to replace that one. So I'm glad I checked this like this. But just so you can see the oil pressure we're actually pumping. With this, we're getting normal oil pressure. I'll rotate this over a few times and so it'll prime the crank and everything. But I'm kind of just doing this now, testing it out. I will do this right before I fire it up when it's all in the tractor. This also primes the oil pump, which is a good plus. Alright, back at it. It's been about a week since I messed with this. One thing I didn't have on video is I just set the air cleaner in place just to see what it looks like. I haven't tightened it down. I got to remove it anyway before we put it on the tractor, but that's about all I've done other than stare at it and touch it about 1,000,000 times. So next step, we're going to install the flywheel. So the flywheel itself, I wire brushed really good and then painted. There's that timing mark we were talking about earlier with the Magneto install. That fire line needs to be centered in a hole on the torque tube when the Magneto clicks. So we'll adjust the Magneto and make sure that happens. But I did not resurface this flywheel. I actually put a sanding disc on a grinder and spun the wheel just to clean it up. But it's in pretty good shape. The ring gear is in excellent shape, which is way better than the one I took apart. Also something to note, I do not have a wick installed for oiling the pilot bushing. I plugged that hole off. In the automotive world, if you have a brass bushing as a pilot bushing and you fill it with grease, that lasts 100,000 miles. So that's my plan. I'm going to fill it with grease and go with it. We'll see how it works. It shouldn't be a big deal really, because you don't sit around much on a tractor with it in gear and the clutch disengaged. Most of the time you're moving or it's in neutral, so shouldn't be too much wear on it. Okay, all that held this on was 4 bolts and lock nuts. So I think this only goes on one way. I'm going to turn it through all the combinations just to make sure. Yeah. Forget it. Okay, I do need to torque that to spec. Okay, stop this from turning. We'll take this crank rotator tool. It actually engages the teeth of the ring gear. Alright, flywheel's on. All set. Now, just because I want to see it there, I'm going to go ahead and install the fan and water pump pulley. That'll probably be it for this video. I would throw the generator on there now, but it's not quite ready. I'm doing a little bit of rework with the generator. I'm going to rewire it, make it run off a standard regulator, and hopefully 12 volts. There'll be a video about that to come. Using the bolt to line the pulley up so it goes in the right place when I push it on. Looks like the flat washers aren't going to fit here because of this ridge. That's fine. Been waiting a long time to do that. So there we go. I'm going to call the engine done for now. I'll do it off camera, but I do need to install. There's a little aluminum spacer here for the dipstick tube. I got to install that and put the dipstick in. We're good to go. I'll leave this sitting out so I can look at it for inspiration. Guarantee now every time I walk by this thing I'm going to spin it. So, got the engine done. Got the transmission done, mostly. I do need to do the differential. That's going to be probably my next video. One final drive done. PTO assembly's done. Got a little rework on the wishbone. There's a pretty good amount of wear I need to do some machine work on. Didn't realize it till after it was painted. Sorry, Dad, I'm going to scratch up your paint job. Maybe not. Back here we got part of the snap coupler. Got some other bits and pieces. Nice seat. I bought the wrong clutch. Got a 9-inch instead of an 8.5. Anybody would need a 9-inch clutch? But so to be able to start putting large assemblies together, I have one final drive and the torque tube to clean up. And then I need to come up with a clutch kit. Well, stay tuned, more to come.